Hello and welcome to Mandibil. I'm taking a small stab at a recent Molyneux video called You Are a Tjen, How to Fall in Love, something like that. How to have the confidence to fall in love. So let me see if I got this set up right here. It looks like it. He's pointing at you like, an old Western guy pointing his gun at you. The Great Train Robbery, one of the earliest cowboy action movies in the world. Okay, um, it's just, whenever I get this sense that he's fucking bullshitting you, right? He is pushing any kind of argument that whatever fits whatever narrative or context he is in, and because he might have said something 5 years ago that contradicts what he's saying now, most people, I believe, wouldn't catch it because it's sort of back when, half of his listeners weren't even listening or have been listening to what he said. So he has been pushing the idea for years and years and years that love is the involuntary response to virtue. Now, he has never, in my mind, or as far as I understand, ever clearly defined what virtue is, right? But, you have an involuntary response to something people does that he qualifies as virtue. But if you're feeling what you call love, it's not given that a certain feeling is actually love. And if you have an involuntary response to something, right? If I see somebody, eating a dog turd, I have some kind of involuntary response, but I'm not sure it's about love, right? Or if I see a big fucking snake, I have an involuntary response to something. Is that virtue or isn't it, right? So he has never clarified this statement about involuntary responses because there are other kinds, I would say, as I just pointed out, responses that could be involuntary, right? So it's just this, it's so easy just to throw words around. He's not being a part of the general world. He's sitting at home in his sofa and talking to a camera and say he has been doing this for 15 years. It's easy to sit there and just, throwing words around. And I mean, yes, I'm sitting in my sofa throwing words around, but I'm still trying to, whenever I present something as sort of a generalized categorization of things, like saying love is the involuntary response to virtue, right? It has to be contextualized. And also, I might point out that it has to be related to your metaphysical reduction base, right? And I recently made a video in Danish about metaphysical reduction base. It's called something like Metaphysical reduktionsbasen, which is sort of a Danishification of the idea of metaphysics and the reduction base. And I might, in not a too far-flung future, do an English language version of that podcast, which was, my driving philosophy in my car. That's why I'm called Mandibil, which in English would be something like man in car or man in a car. So that goes way back to when I started the channel, like 6 or 7 years ago. I was just I was sitting there in my car, talking to my mobile phone. It was an iPhone 4 back in that day. Well, that's a long time ago. Crappy telephone now, right? And if you can see it from the quality of the video, not that that's very important, but you can see it, right? That was sort of the start setup that I was talking in my car and, just thinking out loud, basically, right? Various topics that I was thinking about. And it has developed into sort of a philosophy channel, right? So, and you can clearly see that I have developed a lot through the years. I was sort of basically a an amateur thinker, right? You have to start somewhere, right? And don't be alarmed by you not being good at necessarily good at all ends of philosophy. It will, if you keep going and you can't help it, and you are you have been sort of smitten by that virus. I'm being careful now, right? But the it's sort of a passion, right? If you're passionate about philosophy, you can't let it go, right? I have to have my daily dose of philosophy, basically, right? There are not usually any day that goes by without I'm not having any sort of either a podcast or do my own thinking while I'm doing something else, or riding in my car, or doing something that has some sort of philosophical content. And when I do things, I always have sort of in the back of my head my philosophy, and for good or bad. And sometimes it's not that easy to, if you're discussing with people and you start to argue philosophically, people very quickly notice that you have some sort of capacity that they don't have, right? And I'm going on a little tangent here, right? But it's clearly, when I sort of have my feelers out, right, or my sensors out, or testing the waters, sort of asking a question in a certain way that has a sort of philosophical undercurrent, right? You very quickly get a response that is kind of an ill-hidden attempt at shutting you down, right? You get these sort of quick fix solutions that people have, that sort of covering up that they are not able or don't want to delve into philosophy. This is quick fixes that says, well, it's because of this, it's because of that, and you have to do it this way because your master says, and it's all, all of these arguments that people work from in their daily life is a very thin layer on top of a completely confused cauldron of all sorts of bullshit they have been fed through their life. And in every day, most people stay on top of this thin layer of that is covering up all the bullshit they are trying to, get a grip on, right? And they can't, because it's impossible. But they want to stay with the narrative, right? And that's when you poke a bit of that, right? It very quickly gets down to people reacting sort of feverishly rather than thoughtfully, right? Rather than taking in somebody else's argument and start to think, yeah, you might have something there. I might need to go home and think for a few days about your question. No, it's quick fix. It's like, it's this, it's that, the other, right? It's this sheen of bullshit arguments that are there not to explain anything, but to push people away who try to think for themselves. And thinking for yourself will inevitably, potentially lead them to get under your cover, right? Under your smokescreen, and get into all the bullshit you're covering up that you haven't thought about, or you have just accepted because that's what the narrative wants you to do. So it's just an interesting to do. Now, I like to do it now and again just to see what happens, right? I'm so experienced in this that I know that there are certain things when you start to talk about the state and you basically have a gun to your face to do what your masters tell you, people are then you will be ostracized, right? Because the narrative is your masters are always right? And getting down to that low level or deep level of bullshit that they have, that big pile of dog shit they have been eating all their life, is actually bullshit and not a parfait or something like that, right? Then it's like it's too much for them to handle, so they will push you away no matter how much bullshit that they have to keep eating in order to stay with that artificial explanation of their sort of perfect life. So this is just, your everyday philosophy, right? So it might be interesting sometimes if you are sort of kind of well versed in philosophy, that I consider myself to be. I can still learn a lot of stuff, actually, possibly, right? I'm certain, or I'm not certain. I'm sure I can learn still a lot, right? It's not. It's like you don't know when you philosophize what you might learn in the future. You might stop up and think, I have learned all that I need to know now. It seems to make sense, right? But there's some little part somewhere you have overlooked, right? That might completely overturn your picture, right? Just like in my case, when I figure out that, idealism was actually the right explanation or the right approach to metaphysics, right? It was like the whole thing went belly up, right? At least to some extent, right? It's not like everything was sort of the opposite, but there were some fundamental things that I have to let go. It just followed from I just have to say, yeah, you could think about it, but you will never get to any answer. And then I just say, well, fuck it, right? Don't spend time on it. If you can't get to an answer, why waste your dear life on that? Okay, so let's see what Stefan has to say about love. And as I said, he used to say that, love is he has said two things that I remember. First of all, love is an involuntary response to virtue, whatever that is. So, as I said, there can be many different kinds of involuntary responses, and they're not always about love. So how does he differentiate? Well, I've never heard him explain that, right? There's another thing he said, that love is tell me more. Right? If you care about people, if you love a person, you are interested in that person's life and what they are thinking. And then if there's some kind of conflict, let's say, you would want to know more about that side of the story. And that's, as far as I understand, why he would say, well, tell me more. Because I love you, I want you to tell me more about how you feel about this. And I might actually find out that I might not be right in my situation, or I could point out why there might be something, weird about your way of thinking. And then we might eventually find a common ground somewhere. So if you're not inquisitive or tell me more it's a sign that if you don't care about other people's feelings or the point of view they come with, then it's a sign that you don't love them, right? You don't have the sufficient respect for them. And if you can't love somebody you don't have respect for, right? It seems contradictory some way. So I'm just, I only listened to the first few minutes of this. I haven't listened to the whole podcast or any of it, basically. So I'm taking this on the fly, right? Sort of. So let's go.
But the quality of philosophy that we hand like a baton down to future generations comes entirely down to you poking my brain and stimulating me into great speeches with great questions. I don't know what they are. Otherwise, I was going to ask them myself. But why are most big-name CEOs so woke? Okay, so...
It doesn't seem to work in the window up here, but let's just take it as it comes, right?
My first career trajectory in the business world was actually not in tech, but in HR, in human resources. Now, in human resources is where you put people that you kind of have to hire and you don't really know what to do with. And so you create this, and there was no such thing as human resources before women started to come en masse into the business world, right?
That's actually an interesting point. I have never really understood the need for human resource management, right? What is it that the leaders or managers that are already sort of more in direct contact with the employees in general can't do that somebody in the periphery of the company are better at, right? So one way to see it is that if the managers or leaders who are in direct contact with the employees can't handle these kinds of, human interaction or managing human resources, why are they managers and leaders in the first place, right? Usually when you have, as a new person entering into a company, if you have a sort of more than a very low level responsibility, you are almost certainly going to have as a hiring situation or an interview situation with the HR department if it's more than a brick and mortar small store, right? Then they would have some kind of HR department who is then going to ask you sort of specific, more specific kind of what kind of person are you kind of question. What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? And these kind of sort of bullshit question, right? But they're not bullshit questions. I understand where they're coming from, but I've been to a few HR questionings, and it's also this working from point one. I have to ask this, I have to ask this, and I have to ask this, and then the questions are not the real interest, but how you answer them. That sort of a trick questioning, right? But I have also been to HR interviews where they are very good at getting a ping pong or a more like your average presentation of yourself, and then they sort of deduce from that instead of having these sort of what are your weaknesses, what are your strengths, why do you want to work for us, and what can you bring to the company, and these kind of sort of what would you call it? Sort of one-dimensional questions, right? They're not. They leave you in a situation where you have to sort of protect yourself, and if you ask a, I'm looking for a word I can't get to, but if you ask these kinds of stereotypical or typical questions, you will get a programmed typical answer, right? So if I was doing these kinds of questioning, I would just start to talk about some kind of aspect of this person that I find interesting. Like if you had been if you want to work for a company, but you maybe had your own business, well, that sort of sticks out a bit. And I would sort of feel that sounds interesting. You had this, why did you start your own business? And then you get into how they present themselves and how they approach that job and or that business they had or something. From that you deduce what you want to understand, right? About that person. So how they present themselves and how confident they are in their own decision making and all these things that are important possibly for that work that they are applying for. So it's just another of these. But what I was going to get to is that, but why wouldn't you want the managers who are already working directly with the people that new person possibly is going to be a part of? Why wouldn't you let them handle that? Isn't that what it means to be a manager and a leader? I mean, why would you have some third instance of people over there called the HR department who is going to have some decision about people they are not going to be leading or managing or have any influence in the end? It's kind of weird, isn't it? So it's I've always wondered why are they necessary, these HR people? Why aren't the people who are managing already taking care of these aspects of managing the resources or the human resources, which is also a term I don't like very much. Human resources, isn't that a nicer term than slave owner, right? I mean, it has some sort of human resources. It's sort of, you're just one of these beasts of burden, right? That we have to manage. It's just, it's impersonal, right? You're just a resource. I'm, a human kind of resource that I have to manage somehow, right? You're just one of these things. It's not very personal. It's not very respectful for the individual, thinking of individuals. It's just, I'm not fond of it, right? And that would also be something that would be sort of rejected when if you let your managers who are already managing people take care of this resource management, right? I don't get it, right? It's so necessary, but it has grown out of proportion, in my opinion, right? The closer you are to the decision-making people, right, the more precise they will be in their hiring or managing of those human resources, right? Okay.
Now, they don't have direct line profitability responsibilities. You know, if you've got to produce a certain number of widgets every hour, you've got to produce a certain number of widgets every hour. And if you don't, you get a warning. And if you continue not to, you get fired. So there's kind of like a reality to all of that. But that's kind of stressful for some people, right? So what you put them in HR and you say, okay, well, I guess we have to have some. And so we'll put them there. And they don't have any direct line responsibilities. It's really tough to gauge how they do. And
Yeah, there's some a point to that, I think, right? But why do you have to have them that? What kind of higher management would say, well, but we have to have these people, right? Why? Why do you have to have? I don't know. Maybe he's going to get his point across about that. But then why have them, right? Is it because there's a political incentive somewhere? You have to have human resource management people in your company. I've never actually heard of that. I might be uninformed or misinformed, and it might depend on the masters you have, or the state that you are under, or the government that rules you. But I don't see why you have to have human resource. You could just give every manager of a number of people the resource management of human beings, which they're already doing on a daily basis. Give them the responsibility. Why not? They're there in the first place, right?
And so that HR is to a large degree subsidized by regulations and requirements. And what happens in HR is you get a whole bunch of activists. Because activism versus profitability only occurs when you're really tied into profitability. So you get a lot of job security.
Yeah. They're usually the ones who they're the kind of people who understands that the free market is necessary to fund everything in the world, right? They can't have pure socialism or pure communism because it will break down very quickly, or at least within foreseeable future, right? But they don't want manual labor, of course. I mean, no. They would go to university and have some lefty kind of education of sorts, right? The social whatever BS, right? And then they want to have this kind of job and mold the whole propaganda about how important it is that there are these kind of people who make sure that we are following the virtue signaling. We have the code of ethics, and we have all these kind of, also these sort of value based, that have a tendency to be something along the lines of more socialism, right? It's baked in the cake, right? A free market always attempts to remove the middleman, right? But human resource management is another layer of management, right? That you might as well give to the people who are already managing, and then give them a 20% raise instead of have another 100% wage, 150% raise to a new person who has to manage these things, right? And are bringing in all sorts of weird ideas about how it is to be a human, and they're treating it like just human resource management, right? These lower quality people have to be managed, otherwise it all starts to reek of authoritarianism, right? Okay.
In HR because of regulations, and you end up with a lot of activism. And those activists in HR, like there's a lot of people who view the world as foundationally immoral, bigoted, sexist, racist, homophobic, and so on. And they'll smash just about anything in order to rid the world of the evils that they see. And they see those evils, just about everywhere, because they've been taught that all disparities in group outcomes are the result of bigotry, and there will always be disparities in group outcomes. That's one of the ways you define them as groups. And so you will never, ever solve that issue. It's a modern updating of the thought crime, right? So the thought crime comes out of various religious teachings. And the thought crime is, if you look at another woman in lust, that's the same as cheating. If you look at another man's possessions with envy, that's the same as stealing, right? So the way that you paralyze the most moral among you, because the most moral among us are the ones who generally threaten the status quo, and the way that you paralyze them is you set them against themselves. So you give the most moral among you impossible to achieve moral standards. And that way they're paralyzed. And the greater their conscience, the greater their conscientiousness, the greater their commitment to morality, the greater danger they pose to the elites, and the greater paralysis they then occur. So what you do is you set absolutely impossible moral goals. And then the people most sensitive to immorality will end up.
Well, okay, that's an interesting point of view. I'm not even sure that I can follow the line, but that's not a critique of Stefan Molyneux. Maybe I was just on another level here, or in another end of the spectrum. But there is a point there, right? There is a point in. Maybe an example I could give you was that when people moralize, they basically want to get rid of you, because deep down inside, they know they have no idea what they're talking about. They're just spouting whatever they need to keep doing whatever it is they're doing. Right? They have found their little niche in a violent, immoral system that is hierarchical, right? You find yourself and you make sure that you stay there so you don't fall further down. And you might be able to crawl a bit higher up, right? And whatever bullshit you need to push in order to stay there, that's what you do. And then you pretend that you can't see anything else. But if some idiot philosopher comes around and say, well, the state is immoral, right? You will get possibly an answer like, well, how would you run it, right? What would you do? I need you to give me an answer. I'll have you solve every freaking problem in the world, right? Every little fucking, micromanagement problem have to have a solution, and you have to come up with it now. And if you don't, well, then we need the prime minister to take care of it, right? That's sort of the trick. They push something that you cannot possibly solve within the time frame, or it's too complicated, and then you're going to say, I guess I can't solve it. Aha! So we need a prime minister to do it, right? So they can stay on the shelf they have found in their life. So they are not challenged. It's not challenged. It's sort of overpowering your ability to argue for your. You have maybe a bit of skepticism and doubt about how things are run, right? Look at Joe Biden, who basically shit himself every other day and can't find his own, ball pen. It's like the guy is a fucking idiot, right? And but he's running the biggest and most powerful military and economy of the world. Well, what could possibly go wrong, right? It's like, I'm not sure this is a good idea kind of approach to a skeptic, right? Or a doubtful people, a person who wants to doubt or would doubt this for good reasons, in my opinion, right? And then we would get an answer like that. Yeah, but how would you solve all these billions of problems out there? Should people just, in that country or that town, should they just, die if they can't find food, or what about the sick, or what about the old, or what about the children? You have to solve everything, and you have the answer now. And if you can't, we need Joe Biden to run everything, right? So if that's then I agree completely, right?
In spiral, dry heave circles of guilt and recrimination, and won't pose any threat. They won't come up with UPB. They won't talk about taxation.
Oh, they won't come up with my holy grail, right? Oh, so you just call you don't no longer call it morality or ethics. You just say UPP because you have the Holy Grail in your hand. I have figured it out, UPP. I might mention that you might want to go and listen to my complete deconstruction of his proof in his book called UPB, or Universally Preferable Behavior, which sucks like an intergalactic vacuum, to paraphrase Stefan Molyneux himself. It's awfully bad, right? It's beyond ridiculously badly argued. It's so left-hand amateurishly argued that it's ridiculous that he's still pushing this shit, right? And it's like we are dealing with a guy who cannot possibly see any problems in his own philosophy because he thought these thoughts, therefore it's perfect, right? It must be perfect. It must be functional because he came up with it, right? He's rejecting any kind of criticism, right? This is a surefire sign of megalomania, right? Or narcissism, as it's become to known in the recent years, right? He is just trying to, he has a grandiose sense of his own worth, right? And it comes when he just said, they wouldn't come up with what I have been thinking about, right? It's like, well, of course people would come up with it because it's perfect. So that's what they should be coming up with, right?
They won't talk about the powers that be. They won't talk about the power structures. Because what they do is they obsessively sit in the dark and say, oh, yeah, I did. I looked at somebody else's food and I really, really wanted it. And that's a sin of gluttony. So I really got to work on that. And then I saw a lingerie catalog and I felt lust. I got to deal with that. And you just set them obsessively focusing on every little impulse that their lizard brain kicks up.
Yeah. That's the side effect of what I was mentioning before, that you are attacked with an insolvable problem being insolvable because it's so huge that you're going to solve every minute of every day for billions of people, right? Basically the whole population of the earth, right? Of the global population. So that's a bit more than most people can stomach, right? And it's also a fallacious. The whole argument itself is fallacious because it's an appeal to an authority. That there's some guy somewhere, or some woman for that matter, right, that can tell everybody how they should run their life. And it's also baked in the argument that people are thinking that that's actually how you do it. That's how you figure out what to do. Somebody is going to tell you what to do. Or maybe what you shouldn't do, with sort of, 10 Commandments, something like that, right? There must be somebody somewhere telling you what to do, right? And it's also an indicator that people actually don't want to be moral philosophers, right? They want somebody to tell them what to do. So if something goes wrong, they can always say, well, it was that guy who told me, right? I'm innocent, right? Hitler just told me to shovel these ashes into the oven, right? Or these bodies into the ovens, right? It wasn't me. It was Hitler who told me, right? This appeal to authoritarianism is a foundational problem in the understanding of ethics, in my opinion, right? It has to be done some other way, because it always ends up with some people being in complete control of all power, right? And then we get the First World War, the Second World War, the central bank system, the fiat money system. Everything crumbles because some idiot is going to say, "Well, I'm going to be that guy who tells everybody what to do," and all these idiots just saying, "Oh, thank God, somebody's going to take the torch, right?" But he's going to screw with you from here to eternity. Of course he is, because he's an idiot. He's a narcissist. He's a psychopath. He's crazy, right? Only crazy people want to do that, right? Okay.
Call it evil, and you paralyze people with impossible to achieve moral goals.
Okay, and maybe you could give a nod to the Bible there and Christianity, right? It's also, you have to, what's the commandment? I don't remember exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but you have to respect your parents, right? It's the Ten Commandments is you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, but when it comes to your parents, you should do this, right? Which means somebody can always come around and say, but you're not doing it right? Because you have to do something. You can point to people and say, but you're not doing it, right? While commandments, they say you shouldn't do it. But then you can say, well, I'm not doing it, right? If there's something you're supposed to do, you're actually supposed to do it all the time. And your parents can then come and say, well, you're not doing it right. So it's the balance between have to do or should not do, right? This you can't have both, right? In my opinion, there's no and the Ten Commandments and this authoritarian mystic kind of morality, it sucks, right? It's bullshit. And what we got out of it is just socialism and Marxism the last 150 years, because people know it's bullshit, this Christian belief, right?
And not just impossible to achieve moral goals, but hell if you don't achieve those moral goals. And it was
Yeah, it's just crowd controlling, right? It works because it's something, in my opinion, it works, Christianity, because it's a nice tool for mothers to have to both control your children and they're controlling their husbands, right? It's all this kind of crowd controlling. It's human control of some kind, right? And maybe that's the pointer towards human resource, right? That there has to be some masters telling you how to behave. We are the masters of behavior, right? Or how to act correctly and something like that, right? So it's human resource management departments are very close to becoming an authoritarian entity that tells you how to behave, right?
Some Law and Order episode I was flipping past years ago, and the guy, one of the detectives, was told, well, Jesus wouldn't do that. And the detective just said, well, Jesus is perfect, I'm not. And that way he got to shrug off these endless and bottomless moral commandments. And this is something that I haven't talked about in this show in years and years and years, but it was a very formative moment in my life. I don't know if you've ever had anything similar. If you have, then, please let me know. But what happened for me was, there's an old Cliff Richard song, Power to All Our Friends, to the Music That Never Ends, or something like that, right? I like the song.
Power to all our friends.
He actually does a really nice duet with Van Morrison as well. Really soft, foggy voiced kind of guy. Not as velvet fogged as Mel Torme, but a pretty good singer and a staunch Christian.
A staunch Christian? Oh, that's sophistry, right? He's not saying he's in love with Christianity or, he's not reading or preaching from the Bible. But every chance he gets, it's sort of, there's a Christian over there and they're staunch. It's sort of a positive, it's sort of enveloped in positive language. Man, he's a sophist, right? He knows exactly how to mold it so it sounds like a positive approach to Christianity without saying it directly. Well, I've switched over from bashing Christianity and calling it ridiculous for 10 years and talking about secular ethics and all that. And now I want to bring in Christianity sort of through the back door by, saying this is a staunch Christian, right? Bullshit, right?
I was playing with my cousin. I was very, very little.
Okay.
After I was born, my mother went into pretty catastrophic post-birth depression, postnatal depression, and she ended up being hospitalized for quite a long time. And I ended up living with my aunt and uncle, and I have a cousin there. And I was playing.
It might be a pointer towards some kind of attachment issues that Stefan Molyneux might suffer from, right? There's, as far as I understand, psychology, what I've read and heard is that a lot of megalomania and narcissism stems from attachment issues early in life, right? In the until is something like 4 or 5 years or something like that. You might correct me if I'm wrong, right? But the early stages of life, if you have attachment issues, it's very likely that you're going to end up having megalomania approaches up to life, right? And it's kind of, if you have an empty personality, there's nothing that is you. You don't feel confident in what you are. You don't have to escalate yourself to some incredible standard that is completely ridiculous, right? Because you don't, and if you don't have that kind of personality that you are saying, okay, well, I'm not perfect as such, because I wouldn't even know what perfect is, but I have something that is me. I'm working from that, right? And I'm confident that I can argue and philosophize without having to say, well, I'm the greatest, right? Because it's sort of a smokescreen for you not actually believing what the hell you're thinking. You have to eliminate everybody else by saying you're so great that you don't have to listen to them, right? Your kind of level of certainty has to be shrouded in this, or your lack of personality has to be shrouded in certainty, so you don't have to look at yourself and find out there might not be that much in there. And that possibly stems back from the early childhood and attachment issues, right? That didn't give the child the confidence and self security in, I'm me, right? I'm just not. It's not to eradicate yourself in any way, but it's sort of an inner strength and confidence in you being you, right? If you don't have that because of attachment issues, you are likely going to develop megalomania approaches, right? Narcissism and I'm just so fucking perfect, right? And narcissism, in the way I see it, sort of my own take on it, is that narcissists need people to actually sort of suck the life out of them, suck their personality out of them, right? In order to have their own personality. It's not very good psychology, but I find it a good analogy, because that's how it feels from the other side, that they're sucking the lifeblood out of you in order for them to bolster their own grandiose ideas of themselves. It's the lifeblood they use to create this elaborate megalomania, right? Okay.
With him in the attic. And I think that song was playing on a radio somewhere in the house, because I remember very clearly the tinny song. Now, you ever have it? Somebody posted in one of my social media accounts the other day. Don't I remember you from the Cinematographer's Party, which is a song from Paul Simon's album Graceland. And literally for then 2 days, that worm went into my brain. I know what I know. And I don't know if you have memories of, you either were listening to the song directly or it was playing in your head to the point where it might have been vivid. I remember being stuck in the woods in the winter when I was working up north after high school, and I had to wait for someone. They had to take the snowmobile back. They'd forgotten some important tools we needed for our drilling project, and so he left me there. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I was sitting there in the woods. I ended up lying down on the snow, and I listened to my favorite album in my brain at the time. I think it was Day at the Races or something like that from Queen. And I just reproduced it all in stereo with as many instruments as I could think of, and I just went through the whole album in my head. And you can get yourself to the point where you can really quite clearly hear it. Anyway, so I was playing with my cousin, the age of 2 or 3, in the attic of the house. And that song, Power to All Our Friends, to the Music That Never Ends, was playing somewhere in the house. Or it was just very vivid in my brain. And I felt very cold, a very...
Okay, but this is not philosophy, right? As Stefan Molyneux would say. Your feelings, your emotions, what you're doing inside your head, it's not philosophy, right? You're feeling hunger. You are playing the Queen, Dead Races in your head. You're remembering hearing a song. That's all something that goes on in your head. It's sort of woo-woo kind of, listen to my story. Oh, imagine yourself. Oh, right? It's not philosophy, according to his own standards, right? And it's called a philosophy show, and even the greatest #1 philosophy show in the world, right? Of course, because when you're suffering from megalomania, it's of course the greatest. No matter what, you're just going to find some sophist way to argue why it is the best, right? So why would I listen to your feelings and emotions and memories? Because if it's not philosophy, right? What are you doing then, right?
Negative I, somewhere up in the rafters above me. You ever watch the movie The Name of the Rose with Sean Connery, and you expect the devil to appear at any moment?
Oh yeah, that's guilty pleasure of mine, right? It's not the greatest movie on earth, but it does have Sean Connery in an outlier performance, right? And a very young Christian Slater, by the way, and is one of the greatest sort of modern detective books by Umberto Eco, which is he is actually an Italian philosopher, linguist, history teacher, something like. He writes very intelligently composed books about sort of philosophical, historical aspects, like The Name of the Rose, right? But it's sort of a unique sample of a historical setting with a sort of a Sherlock Holmes story, and showing the history of that time around the Inquisition and the Dulcinites and all these sort of historical aspects that went on like 800 years ago, something like that, right? In the mid 1300s or something like that. It's just before the early Renaissance, right? Interesting historical period, right? So, but it's a great story, and it's sufficiently well directed by a French guy, Arnaud, Jean-Jacques Arnaud, who made other interesting, outlier kind of movies in those days. Like Quest for Fire, which is another cult movie, but it's a great story, right? But let's see what he has to say.
That's kind of what it was like.
It's a great movie, I would say. I can recommend The Name of the Rose, right? It's a good movie.
And I had this very strong, very powerful feeling.
It's not philosophy that you have a powerful feeling, right? It's not philosophy. Why are you talking about your powerful feelings if it's not philosophy?
That was God, and if I loved God, I had to hate that song. And if I loved that song, I couldn't be good with God. And I remember many years...
What kind of bullshit sophistry is this? Right? What kind of sophistry is it? If it's this again that I mentioned in a recent podcast, is this black and white thinking, right? Either this or this, right? I know that philosophy at times, there are some things that are either or, right? Like a proposition. Either it's an elephant or it isn't an elephant. Either you experience elephant or you don't experience elephant, right? But these, everyday scenarios where you end up, I hear a song, and either I love the song or I hate God, or I hate God and love the song, whatever it is, right? These are sort of conjured of dichotomies that is sort of a, what's it called when you have forceful thoughts that are, you are sort of you're forcing yourself into a decision, right?
Later, seeing Scorsese's movie with Willem Dafoe, a great soundtrack from Peter Gabriel called The Last Temptation of Christ, And he's like, do I live for the next world? Do I live for the higher world? Or do I live for this world? And it's not a great movie at all. The acting's good. I remember that. Didn't he have to tape down his bonus while he was getting crucified, which is very kinky and all? But, you know, do you live for the higher world or do you live for this world? And I, of course, could have rejected the song and embraced God, but feeling that then I would then have to reject the world that is, the world that was. And it was tempting, but there was such a coldness in the eye. Now, of course, some people have since told me that that was the devil, not God.
Holy, oh man, what is it? What kind of mental state is this guy in at the moment, right? He's trying to figure out if he should believe in God or whatever. What is it? What are you doing, man, right? It's been going on for years now, right? It's like he's talking about this God and Jesus and staunch Christians and the Ten Commandments, but, you know, rational secular ethics that people are attacking, but they're not attacking God because they don't dare, right? So if I jump over and become a Christian, I'm getting rid of all this critique of my ethics. Is that it? Don't you have the fucking balls to argue for your ethics? Right? Are you a wanker when it all comes down? Right? You tried once to argue for ethics 15 years ago, and you're still clinging to every comma, every letter, every, you know, point, every single argument put forth there, and it has been deconstructed by me at least. It has been criticized by numerous people, not least rationality rules. And you pointed out there are at least 15, 17 fallacies committed in the book, and you haven't even approached him about it, right? Why don't you do the fucking philosophy job rather than, you know, starting to spooning up with Christianity? It's a wanker, loser solution, right? That's for wankers. That's not for, you know, staunch philosophers, right?
But it feels pretty punitive for the first, quote, spiritual experience I had as a very little boy to be the devil. So my perspective was that it was God, and I could not leave the music of the world and the beauty of the world behind to ascend like some helium balloon into the interstellar depths of an infinite consciousness and leave my body.
So you're Mr., you know, empiricism, right? Objectivity, the real world, the scientific, real, objective, whatever. That's the whole idea of the Enlightenment, right? That you can't just have an idea, and because I have an idea in my head, I have to enforce that idea upon you, right? Which is sort of the whole God thing, is that I have a mental idea in my head, and I'm going to enforce it on you without having to go through the cumbersome scientific method or empiricism and all that, right? They don't actually want it because they know that it's going to be fucking destroyed. Because there is no empiricism in all these crazy ideas, right? They can't see God. They can't experience God. They can only see, yeah, but I talked to God while you weren't there, right? I talked to God and God told me, right? And then you know you're being manipulated and by sophists who want to control you by saying, yeah, but we have all seen God. I talked to that guy. He had seen God one day when he was alone, and that girl over there says she has seen God when she was all alone. And then they sort of 10 against 1, right? And then people fold and say, I guess they're right. I have to live in this weird world where people are talking about things that I can't see, right? That's why you need empiricism. You have to say, unless I can experience it empirically, I'm not going to go with it, right? Unless I can fucking experience it now, or I can approach it. I can go and say, well, If you're saying bananas don't exist or something like that, okay, I have a chance to go to my grocery store and say, that's a banana, and point to it, right? Bring that guy along and say, do you agree that that's a banana? If he says, no, that's not a banana, bananas don't exist, I'm going to say, well, screw you. I'm finding some other friends, right? And if it's your family, well, to stay sane, you have to say, well, fuck you, family, right?
My hearing, my love of the senses. Sensuality is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, sensuality, well, empiricism, right? The road to knowledge is through your senses. The only way, by the way, right? The only access to knowledge is through your senses. Now, it's slightly more complicated, which I've tried to point out in all my deconstructions of his philosophy, but what you objectify from that experience, that empirical experience, which are the qualia of your senses, are your conceptualizations, like banana, as I mentioned before. There's nothing that says just because you're experiencing a certain shape and a certain color that it must be a banana. But that's your mind conceptualizing that particular instance of your experience as banana. And then you have nothing else to go by than saying, well, I guess that's a banana. Because my mind says it might change, it might be incorrect, I have no way of checking. But I tend to go with my experience or my objectification, which is in this case is a banana. Okay, fine. That is what can be true. Your banana can be true. The color yellow can't be true because there's nothing specific about the color yellow. That must be something that is unique. But banana is unique, right? Banana is banana, and not being a banana is not contradictory to banana, right? Because there's nothing else that can be a placeholder for banana or can be placed in its stead, all right? Okay, I got a bit out of a tangent here. I lost contact with the original point I was trying to make. So let's enter into it again.
To love touch, to love sound, music, to love sunsets, to love the beauty.
Oh, I love sunsets. Yes, I'm so feminine in my approach. I like sunset and all the colors and the smells. Oh, it's sophistry, right? Stop the fucking sophistry. Use philosophical terms, right? Qualia, empiricism, scientific method, right? Why do you need to do this? That's because that works. People are offended kind of when you're using two philosophical terms. You have to, I love the sound of Queen. Oh, I love the sound of, Cliff Richard singing in 1972. I love it. It's such a beautiful song. So all this subjective sophistry, which he usually calls, well, it's not philosophy, right? And now he is wallowing in his own sensual experience. So he can say, well, I'm not philosophizing at the moment, right? No, but okay. But you're not saying, by the way, the next part I'm going into is not philosophy. I'm just wallowing in my own personal subjective experiences of my sense data. And I'm going to tell you when I get out and be philosophical again. He doesn't do that. So there's a risk or chance, whatever you want to put, that people are going to take this as philosophy. And maybe he wants it to be that way, right? He wants to be able to say to somebody else if he doesn't like the argument that that's not philosophy because it's subjective, right? But he's wallowing his subjective experiences as what happened to him 50 years ago is so important.
Of the world around you. To love taste. Great food. That's a horrible thing to leave behind. And it also felt like, why would a God design me to love all of these things and then command me to abandon them and hate them or reject them?
But it's not God that does that, right? It's all those people who want to control you, right? Saying your bodily desires, your bodily experience are not important. It's the great I of the God that is you. He's ruling everything. He's just trying to confuse you so that you have to figure it out for yourself to get through the pearly gate into the heavens and stay there forever with your family. Oh, bullshit, right?
It did not seem like a good path to abandon the world and float up to that eye and gain the approval of the eye by denying everything that gave me pleasure. That just didn't seem like the right course. Look, I understand. Obviously, these aren't all the thoughts that I had when I was 2 or 3. But these were just sort of instincts that I had, that I recoiled from the eye.
When you were 2 or 3, you were having thoughts like this? I don't think that power to all the power to the people, all the world. I forget the title or the song or the lyrics, but I don't think it was the late 60s. I think it was the early 70s, like 71 or 72. I'm not certain about this, right? So if he's like basically the same age as me, a few months younger, right? So he's around 50, going on 56, right? 55 years old, right? Then he would have been born in late 1966. And if it was early 70s, it would have been 6 years old, 5 years, 6 years around that time, right? I might be, completely missing the point. Maybe I should look it up. Maybe I should look it up. It doesn't matter too much, but let me see if I can find it here. Hang on a sec. Power to all our friends, that never ends. Power to all our friends, sung by Cliff Richards from 1972. Okay, so he wasn't 2 or 3 years old. He must have been 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, right? So this is also a weird kind of, when you're 2 years old, you don't have thoughts like this. Why is he saying that, right? It's also in the formative years of your personality, and I think that I have a pocket philosophy that says that's why you can't remember your youth, because that's where you are destroyed by civilization and your parents, right? You can't, because it's too, what's the word? It's too powerful to remember how you were manipulated. So the generations that for some reason developed or evolutionized into not remembering their childhood were actually better suited to survive, because they were not affected by their early childhood, where they were manipulated by everybody to conform into whatever stupid thoughts these people had, right?
Because I loved the song. And to wrap yourself in the material is what it is to be human. Our humanity is defined by our materiality. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is I had the temptation to set myself against myself. I had the temptation to oppose.
No, it's not against yourself. You had the temptation to go along with the bullshit, or stay trying to be, living in insanity, right? Not living in insanity, but living as a sane life, right? Even though you might have attachment issues because of the way you were brought up in early childhood, and all the bullshit people around you, which would be like saying, yeah, there are those who would kill me if I don't behave, but I think I will go crazy if I don't behave as I like to behave and trust the world outside me that I'm experiencing. Of course, that's why you became philosophical, right? That's why you became philosophical, because that's the that's how you think about how to approach this experience. The easy road is to just go along with what all the bullshit people say, and the hard road is being philosophical about it, which is thinking for yourself. And good for you that you sort of, chose the philosophical path. But don't think that you have eliminated the weaknesses you have from attachment issues that time and again brings in this black and white thinking. This is not the first time you brought, it's either the music or God. If I go with God, I have to reject the music. If I go with the music, I have to reject God, right? I understand your argument, but it's pathologically black and white, in my opinion, in this situation. It's like you are arguing not from philosophy, but from a delineation between madness and, you're standing on the, you should be inside normality here, right? But you're standing on the borderline between madness and sanity, right? And you're arguing from that borderline always, right? And that's weird. And maybe that's the point why you thought that you could just write a book about ethics and write essential philosophy and write how to argue, and people would sort of kiss your ass from here to eternity about how great you are. But your megalomania says that it must be perfect, right? And if people don't treat me as if it's perfect and they argue with me about it, they're trying to push me into insanity, right? It's pushing me into God. And that's, it's like, that's his, it's possibly maybe because of his family and his wife and whatever, they don't eat his philosophy raw, but that's the fucking job of being a philosopher, is keep fighting for your arguments and being critical about your own arguments. Because if people don't understand your arguments, it might be because you're not arguing well enough, or there might be some problem somewhere, or something you haven't found. You're just saying, well, 15 years ago I brainstormed and I found this is the solution, and I haven't, touched it since, right? I'm just keep arguing the same argument. If you argue against me, you prove my ethics. It doesn't work, mate, right? You have to go back to the drawing board. But your megalomania comes in the way of doing that, right? So you have to jump ship into mysticism. Well, good luck with that, right?
Everything that I loved in the material sense, and to spend the rest of my days, endless that they would be, to spend the rest of my days.
And that is, spend the rest of my days. It's like a preacher, right? Preachers, they wave, they create this, they're trying to put you into a trance or something like that, right? And he's looking down like he's very thoughtful, and he's lowering his voice, and then probably soon he's going to raise his voice and say, I found out the solution. It's and fight the sword in hand, and you can go out and do my bidding, and possibly, right? Okay, man. He has to retract to sophistry because he's not confident enough in his own argument in order to stand by them or criticize his own argument and bettering them, or solidifying them, or, honing them into being more rigid arguments. He has to, take a step back into sophistry and using language and, the swings in the moods of his voice and things like that. And that's, off-putting. That should be off-putting. It's very off-putting for me, right? It's sort of a step out of and say, okay, I have my own philosophy. Don't try to fucking manipulate my mind, right?
Fighting myself.
Oh, looking into the camera. I'm looking straight at you, right? This is also a sort of narcissist. It's sort of he uses all these tricks, right? He uses these tricks. looking at you, and now I'm serious, right? I'm so serious. The narcissistic stare. I think there's even a term for it, right? The narcissistic stare, which is, I'm looking straight into you, right? I'm looking like I am, it's like a laser vision of a kind, right? That's almost like, whoa, what are we doing here, right? It's sort of almost an eye attack of a kind, right? Okay.
Posing myself. And the more you fight yourself, the less able you are to fight evil, which is one of the reasons why evil will set up impossible moral standards. And the tension and
but that's what these kind of sophists and sick narcissists in the political realm, right? They say, well, there's a virus. You can't handle the truth, right? It's too big for you, little peon. You have to do my bidding, right? You have to, because you can't make the solution. You can't handle the truth. I have to do it for you. Do my bidding, right? Put on 16 masks and take 6 injections in your ass, right? Do as you're told, or you're a bad person, right? Exactly. He's got that right. Absolutely. That's how they do it, right? The fight against terror, you can do it, but you have to give me money so I can go to some foreign country and bomb the shit out of them to protect you against this invisible, foe.
And frustration that you have paralyzes you into fighting real battles. And that's why, like in this show over the last...
Yeah. Okay, I'm breaking into his arguments, but this is my show, right? You can go listen to the whole podcast of his. That it's to disarm you and give them power over you, and by you giving them power, they can also, by democracy, get power over everybody else, right? Just as long as the majority have been scared into submission or been gaslighted into submission and giving them the power, they don't care about the rest. As long as they have majority, they can say, fuck you, I have the majority on my side. So you're going to do whatever I tell you to do, right? So it's like, okay, if you have handed over the power of morality to some ruler, what's the limit? At what point do you say, until here and no further, now I'm taking over and being moral? The more you give them, the less you have of an argument to push back against them, right? And this is what is going on now, and possibly is going to go on for the next 5 or 10 years, is that they're going to say, well, you have given me power over everything. Now I have to fucking rule your life because you have given me the power. You can't rule your own life because I have the power. You have given me the tools to rule everything in your life, right? Because the more power you're given to these people, the less power you have to push back against them, right?
16 years, I've never set up an impossible moral standard. Not once, not ever, and never will I do so. To set
a impossible moral standard? I would like to have an example of that. Maybe is that what he says about, as I just explained, that they are saying, well, what are you going to do about terror? Well, I don't know. Okay, then you have to give me money, so I have to bomb the shit out of the Middle East, right? I understand that. But you have never. I'm just... It's like, why would you say that? Is that because you would actually have the ability to do it, right? You realize you actually have to have the ability to argue in that fashion, just like your Steelman ideas, right? That you should be able to argue any stance. Well, is that a sophist Freudian slip that I have never done that, right? No, don't look at me. I have never done that. Maybe you have, right? You're just trying to, backtrack now. I don't know. I just feel manipulated, right?
up an impossible moral standard is to paralyze the moral muscles needed to oppose the evildoers in the world.
But moral muscles to oppose the evildoers? What is that? What the moral muscle? What is that? Is it, well, if you argue against me, I'm right? Is that the moral muscle? Or because Hume says you ought not get an ought, He's contradicting himself by saying you ought not get an ought, and therefore you can get an ought. Is that the moral muscle you're going to pull on me? Well, it doesn't work, mate, right? It's bullshit. Go watch my deconstruction of his UPB book, right? It sucks, right? You're not going to be the guy. If you keep pushing UPB, you need to go back to the fucking drawing board and come up with something better than UPB, because it doesn't work, mate, right? Nobody understands it. Nobody uses it. I'm even concerned that you yourself use it, because you are sucking up to Christianity and the Ten Commandments every chance you get.
Somebody says I've been doing that for years. I'm finally breaking that. Now,
I'm just wondering what sidetrack we are on, because it was a you are a 10. Now, it might be that this is a larger podcast where this about falling in love is just a small section, but sort of it gets the whole label for the whole podcast. Okay, that's sort of a disappointing and annoying, because how long do I have to wait to get to the title of the thing?
there's two ways.
On the other hand, he's spending much time on ethics here, so that's a bit of a positive surprise, because I'm more interested in that, in his ideas about love.
That morality serves evildoers. And this relates back to the question of the CEOs. And
Yes, because a moral argument is disarming, right? If you can get to say you're bad, people have no argument against it, because they have no moral principle that they can use to push against them, right? So any chance they get, they use some kind of moral argument to disarm you, to say, well, okay, I guess I can argue against morality because I have nothing to work with, right? Immanuel Kant doesn't work, right? Hume doesn't work. Aristotle doesn't work. Socrates doesn't work, right? Karl Marx doesn't work. Christianity doesn't work. It hasn't been working for 2,000 years. It's not going to work tomorrow, isn't it? Is it? Right? It's not. It has been used to subdue the little people rather than controlling the maniacs and the psychopaths, right? Christianity sucks. It doesn't work. And that's what the rulers want. They want you, little people, to be uneducated in morality so that you have nothing to argue with, right? So they can get around using morality to their advantage to control you, right?
the woke corporations and so on. So if you can convince the most moral that they must war against themselves, that takes them out of the battle.
The most moral, is that those who are actually trying to argue for a moral principle, or what are you saying? Or is that the sort of your subjective judgment of specific people acting in a certain way that you consider moral? Because it's a kind of a lame argument, isn't it? What are you saying? You have to be more precise in your language, referring to something that is controllable by those you present it to, so they can say, okay, that's the reference for that particular principle or that moral statement or something, just not the most moral. What is that, right? That's a subjective judgment, isn't it? It's more like a virtue judgment, in my opinion, right? Or a reference to it. It might not be, because there's no moral principle that we can refer to the best of my knowledge. I mean, it doesn't work. So the argument is sort of empty.
In the world for the future. It's like if you can say to a boxer, let's say that I'm a boxer and I'm fighting a guy named Jake, right? And somehow I can get Jake to believe that he must be in absolutely perfect health before he can fight. Absolutely perfect health before he can fight. Is it ever possible to be absolutely in absolute perfect health? Well, of course not. Because if you exercise...
Yeah, the point is, you control what it means to be perfect in that sense, right? Because perfect is not something you can find out in nature. It's a description. So if you are the one making the description what is perfect, you will also always be more perfect than your opponent. So you can say, well, you can't fight me. You have to give me money because you are in this fight. But you're not perfect, so you can't fight yet. You're too stupid. You're not worthy, right? No, it's always those in power who controls the narrative of what it means to be a good person, right? And they're always on the good side. Even if they're not on the good side, it's like, well, I have to do these things because people don't behave, right? So I have to be a bad person. It comes with a job of being dictator. It is punishing people who are not doing the right thing, right?
Then you are going to hurt your joints a little, hurt your muscles a little, particularly as you age. So the fitter you get, the more you court injury. You'll never be in perfect health. But if I'm really scared of Jake, and he's going to kick my ass Will Smith style all up and down the boxing ring, then I absolutely want to convince him that he cannot fight me, or anyone for that matter, until he's in absolutely perfect physical health and readiness. And since he will never, ever be in perfect physical health and readiness, all he's going to do is spend all of his time. Haven't you missed me? Of course you have. He's going to spend all of his time training and preparing, punching the bag and skipping the rope and running up and down the steps, Rocky style. He's going to spend all his time doing that. And he's never going to fight me. He's never going to fight anyone else. He is no danger to anyone in the boxing world because perfection has been the standard of participation in boxing. Now, of course, I will want to train, but I'm not going to have a standard of perfection. The only perfection is, did I win the fight? That's the only perfection. Did I win the fight?
Okay, so if you have presented a moral principle or a system, apparently, for checking moral statements, not necessarily moral principles, then you must be perfect then. Because you're referring to some kind of perfection of morality. So unless you're perfect, you shouldn't be taken seriously if you're trying to do some kind of morality that is, covers everybody. So you're implicitly saying you must be perfect. Is that what you're saying? Because that taps into this idea of megalomania or grandiosity.
So the most dangerous people need to be infected with thought crime, that they must endlessly police themselves and run after a train that they will never catch, called moral perfection. So that's the one side, right? That's the one side. Now,
I'm goofing around with these windows in my stream software here, and I'm sorry if it starts to look weird, but I'm not sure what the hell I'm doing. I thought I had put it in the right way, but it seems that I should have placed it otherwise to be able to see both the software and the window I'm using to stop and start the video. So now it has been moved into the center, and a third of the right side of the screen is just black. So it's like it's been a bit of time since I did this last, so I'm out of experience. What's it called? I'm forgetful about how it's to set up, right?
the other side is really quite different. And what that is you say to people, there are perfect moral standards, but I'm not going to set you at war against yourself. Oh no, because I need...
There are perfect moral standards. It's okay, it's loose talk this. Okay, I'm overbearing, right? But when we get into this about, morality and moral principles, I fucking want it to be, clear what we're doing, right? So I'm okay, I'm letting him ramble, right? But it's like, it's always this, you're being groomed, I feel, right? Because it's a show. He needs to make people sit there and watch him talk to make them keep coming back every month to give him donations, right? That's his business model. Don't forget, this is a business. This is not He's not sucking up to, or he's not, he's not showing, it's not out of respect of philosophy he's doing this. His core incentive is making money or staying afloat so he can stay at home and take care of his family rather than go out for a 9-to-5 job, right? To keep this in mind always, right? Philosophy and money doesn't mix very well, right? So he has to twist it around and, don't scare people away or don't be whatever, right? To make sure that he stays in business. It's a big point. It's the all-encompassing point, right? It's the major point. He has to make sure that he stays in business. And then philosophy, rigidity of philosophy has to be second on the list at most.
You to be an enforcer. See, the paralysis just takes out the strongest moral voices. But you need the enforcers to frighten and bully and put down everyone else, right? I talked about the slave-on-slave violence as the foundation of oligarchical hierarchies. You don't beat up the slaves, at least not too much, but you get the slaves to beat up each other for even questioning the system, right? So you need the enforcers. Now,
yeah, but I don't think that it's necessarily that people are aware that, okay, I can't, they know that they're going to be beaten by the masters if they criticize the masters. But they don't want anybody in their nearness on their same level or a lower level even, right? To question how they have this approach. They're just sucking the ass of the masters, right? Out of fear of being, having their goodies taken away from them, right? It has become a master-slave. The modern welfare state has become a master-slave setup, as it has been in all history, right? All of history. The nature of your masters, it's just the most cunning of them that are in work now. It used to be the guy with the most soldiers who got to rule you, right? Now it has to be the most sophist, the sophist, the manipulators, those who are most cunning, who can, get somebody to strike fear into them so they inject themselves with some kind of shitty experimental jab who God knows what's inside of it, right? Those are the people ruling now. And I would rather have some stupid king who had the most soldiers making sure that his son is going to take over rather than some weird democratically elected psychopath, right? Democracy is the god that failed, right? As that guy who wrote that book, I forget his name. That monarchy is actually, even though it's not very good, it's better than democracy. It's going to be people scrambling to get other people's stuff, right? So democracy is an institutionalization on slave action, right? It's like democracy is, well, your neighbor over there is voting for some other guy or some people to take my money, so they can get it. I mean, no wonder the structure, the fabric of society is crumbling because the guy or girl next door might be voting to get your fucking money and voting. It's okay that you can get your family destroyed if one of the parents wants to destroy the family. Then they're getting support from the masters and so on, right? It's also corrupt. It's so fucking corrupt to the core. There's basically nothing left than doing the bidding of your masters, right? And it's also those who get into power get more and more ridiculous, right? It's a clown world, right? Donald Trump is a big fucking clown, right? Joe Biden is a clown with Alzheimer's, right? And having a grown-up diaper on or something like that, right? It gets more and more and more ridiculous because those that people think are in power, right? Those, galleon figures that people think are in power and that control their mind narrative are not really in power. There's a whole deep state behind them who controls this marionette in order to tell people how they should think. It's so fucking corrupt to the core, right? Okay, that was just my rant, right?
The way that you get the enforcers, if you're in charge of the culture and so on, right? The way that you get the enforcers is you say there is a perfect moral standard that other people are violating. You are perfect. But those other people are really evil and need to be punished for that evil doing. You are morally perfect. Those people are morally evil and must be punished. And your morality is based upon punishing them. Your moral perfection increases as you punish the people who are the evildoers. So you take the universalists and the really strong moral conscience people out of the equation by giving them a fight they can never win against their own material impulses. And then you take the massive midwits and you say, oh, they're evildoers. And you're perfectly virtuous only insofar as you attack those evildoers. Those evildoers have been a lot of different groups. Doesn't really matter. It matters to the evildoers, of course. Hello, right? It doesn't matter in terms of our analysis. It certainly matters to the people involved, right? You've had infidels, you've had your blasphemers, you've had your racists, you've had your wit.
But isn't it the same that Christianity does, right? Isn't it? The Inquisition, the Crusades, it's like your masters are in control of morality because they're the ones having access to that being that you do not have access to. That being is telling them about perfect morality, and you just have to fucking obey. Otherwise, you're the immoral one, right? That's what Christianity does, and all sorts of other religions. It's always about some select people who are, for some strange reason, also those who have the violent power. They're the ones who can, for some reason, have access to this being, right? And tell you, well, I spoke to the being and he says, those people over there are immoral, right? Bullshit.
You've had your warlocks, you've had your devil worshippers, you've had sexists, you've had transphobes and TERFs and homophobes. You create some group that you are morally obliged to attack and destroy in order to be virtuous. And that creates a slave-on-slave violence that keeps people distracted from the real powers in the world. Right, so you understand, if you can convince people to attack themselves, that takes them out of the equation of fixing society. If you can convince massive groups of people to attack others, then you create a kind of civil war in your society that has people fighting each other, right? Like that famous scene in Life of Brian when the revolutionaries are all fighting each other and the Roman guards are just sitting there like, oh my God, let them do their thing, right? We don't have to get involved. We can just beat up on each other.
Yeah, like,
so
if you know the old Monty Python movie, Life of Brian, where they have to go get the Romans and they are in the sewers and they meet some other group of, revolutionaries, and then they start to infight each other, right? They are eradicating each other while they should combine their efforts in order to get rid of the Romans. So, yeah. And if the Romans can create that kind of infight, they can sit there just watching the idiots fight among each other, right? That's absolutely, he's spot on, Stefan Molyneux here. That's how you control people. It's get them to fight each other, right? Say that there's someone among you who doesn't behave. They're the problem, right? There's somebody among you. They're the evildoers. They're the one creating all the problems, right? The anti-vaxxers. That's a great one, right? Oh, it's the anti-vaxxers, right? It's the Jews. It's the whatever come up with. It's those among you. It's not the rulers. We are just trying to help you fight these evildoers, right? Well, Stefan Molyneux is spot on this. I agree.
The impossible moral standard in the past used to be no bad thoughts. Not even a bad thought, not even a bad impulse. A wet dream is a sin, right? Lust, unacted upon, is a sin.
Yeah, but that's, Christianity works from you learn to attack yourself, right? You're born bad, right? It's not even those are bad over there. That works also, but you should self-attack, right? You should self-control. You should feel that you are born bad, and you can only, by acting certain ways, be accepted into the club, right? So that's, oh man, I feel for people who have been, right, destroyed mentally by this, right? Or close to, right? People who have gotten out of this, well, thank God, right? Thank God. That's the most stupid comment. Well, it's a figure of speech, right? Thank God. Yeah, it's just, you use these terms. They are so ingrown into the language that you're not even thinking, right? Like holy shit, or yeah, good God, and it's just like it's a well, what's it called? Figure of speech, right? It's not because you actually mean what you say, but it expresses an emotion, right? Okay, let's see what he has to say.
Even thinking about food makes you fat, morally, right? So give that impossible moral standard. That was in the past. Now, as people lost their faith in religion, in particular Christianity, you had to create a new impossible moral standard, right? Anybody know what the new impossible moral standard is? It's not bad thoughts.
Well, I suppose you're going to tell me. I'm not going to try to guess it and say, no, it was something else.
What are the impossible moral standards?
Global warming, or, what's it called? Climate change. You can't handle the whole world, so your masters have to regulate the climate for you.
Social justice, sure. But that's a bit abstract, right? In more particular, Marcus, what do you got? What is the impossible moral requirement to call a society moral, and it will never be achieved? Yeah, universal equity, egalitarianism, equality of outcome.
That's a good one also, right?
Right? Anything that has the word...
It's also what feminism does. It's always equal. Men are just stronger than women, so women must always be helped. They're victims of men, right? Or it's as soon as you get one piece of bread that is larger than all the other pieces of bread, that's inequality, right? Yeah. But exactly, it's one of those, right? That's also a good one. I would agree that idea of equality, right, is something that has been going on since Karl Marx, right? He is Mr. Inequality, right? It's like, it's people are fighting with each other, the 30 Years' War or the Napoleonic Wars and all that, right? It's because of disparity of economics, right? Back in the day, everybody was poor except a very few who were rich. That was how it was everywhere. But as the Industrial Revolution appeared, some of those on the same level of you, right? Some of those who were usually also poor, because everybody was poor, except for these guys up there, right? But everybody was poor. Now, some of your level is rising above your level. That's when the envy starts to come in, right? Then equality can be used, and then Marx comes along and says, well, it's because of this equality people are fighting, right? So.
Social in it is equality of outcome. So justice is equality of opportunity. Social justice is equality of outcome.
And that's correctly identified by Stefan Molyneux, is that because some of those you are in the group with, all the little people over here, you should be equal. And because when the Industrial Revolution came up, some of these who have a mind they can use to enrich themselves by working in the free market will get richer, right? And then some of those who are usually on the same level are starting to become on different levels, right? It creates these sort of economic classes, something like that. And then the masters are going to say, aha, it's the inequality among you, little people, right? Attack those who have more money. They have stolen it from you. Take it from them, right? And because there are always more people who are not rich than those who are rich, or you can make a delineation to make sure that there's a majority who are not as rich as the minority, then they can gather together in their democracy and say, we have to take the money because they are evil, right?
So, if you can find any group that is underrepresented or claims that they are in any particular area, then you can claim that the only reason that there's not a perfect equality of outcome is because of racism, sexism, bigotry, exploitation, profit-seeking, price gouging, you name it, right? So before, you had to have no bad thoughts. Now, you have to have no, quote, inequality. No bad thoughts paralyze the moral actors. Equality weaponizes the moral actors. Now, once people have done deep immorality,
so now we are raising the voice, right? Before he was, very softly spoken and the sort of, and now we are starting to yell. Now we are going to rally. We are going to rebel rouse. We are going to. He's a master sophist, right? He can give you something that is completely correctly identified about how the dynamics of human interaction is, right? Like, equality and how it is exploited by your masters, right? And then go into, so yes, that's right, he's right, that's actually, and then he starts to raise his voice, right? And then rally behind me, I'm going to fight the evils. Don't read my book, just stand behind me, or I'm going to be behind, you are going to go in front of me and be, my buffer zone fighting the evils, right? Because he's stepping down, hiding down behind the backmost people, right? But he's going to try to rally you, right? I don't like this kind of rhetoric, right? It's obnoxious. It's toxic, right? It's actually toxic, right? He's intoxicating your brain with his language.
In the cause of virtue, right? Once they've punished, attacked, slandered, lied about, deplatformed, libeled, slandered, or physically attacked. Once they have been roped into the dark machinations of the Black Army of hyper-egalitarianism, man, they're in. They got the tattooed tear. They're in. And then something very interesting happens in society. Well, it's not a theory, it's happening right now. What happens in society is that the people who've done great ill and harm,
and then he changes his face to this. It's like, why is that necessary? He's trying to manipulate you with these signals, right? By changing his voice and the way he looks at you and the mouth and the agitation. It's not philosophy when you have a guy doing this, right? It's sophistry. It's manipulation. He is very smart in the way he says, well, they're these very bad guys, but he is actually attempting underneath this to use exactly the same kind of rhetoric that they're using, right? He's just using your intelligence in order to get you to accept him as a kind of authority, right? So he's standing with the minority, you can say, and that's, well, at least that's something. But he still wants to be a kind of a ruler, right? That's what I see. He's not. He's not trying to argue for you, trying to think for yourself. No. It's about his UPB. People can't come up with UPB because they are being, manipulated, right? So, but he came up with UPB. So that's what you have to come up with. And by the way, I came up with it because I defined what UPB was. So he's defining how you should approach morality, right? So he's doing the exact same thing, just from a sort of pseudo-philosophical point of view, right?
To the innocent, based upon all disparities in outcome are the result of evil, that it is perfectly, in fact, encouraged, perfectly permissible, if not encouraged, to violently attack and destroy.
Oh, I got the point now, right? Would you carry on, please?
All the people who've acted on that view any potential competing or alternate explanation for society as a great predator that would reveal them, if true, as evil.
I'm just wondering, why is there this black curtain behind him? There used to be a white wall and some coloring lights. Has he been, put into the cellar or something, and he has to hide his mess? And if his wife is such a traditional woman, why hasn't she ironed it? It looks like it's just, pulled out of the bag down from the store, right? There curls, or what's it called, waves in the sheet. Why didn't she iron it? Is she such a great, traditional wife? Or, why haven't you done it, right? Guess it doesn't matter, right? Just an observation.
So the midwits who've been weaponized into attacking those who question
The midwits?
one answer fits everything, prejudice and bigotry for disparate outcomes. People like me or whoever, right? People who talk about alternative or complementary or even displacing arguments and facts about, quote, inequality. Right? So the people who say, well, women only earn 67 cents on the dollar or 70 cents or 80 cents on the dollar for men because sexism, right? People who come up with...
Yes, it's also the tool you also get. You can't just give the fact, or they who want to manipulate this way, they can't just give the fact. They have to indicate that these people who are in power to do this have ill thinking. They have bad think, right? It's because they are sexist or something like that. It's because they don't like these people, right? It's because they want them. They don't want women to have money. They always have to be framed in a bad light. And because it's a moral argument, then they switch over to this moral kind of argument. And because the state are those in modern day who control morality, it's an appeal to state to intervene using morality, right? Because you can't go to some person or say morality, and then you will get the same wage as whatever you want to have the same wage as, right? You have to say morality, and then the state will say, aha, we are the one, doing the morality thing, so we have to bring our guns to force these people to pay for whatever, right? So, yeah, that's how they bring in the morality aspect of arguing. And, it's very sick, right? And at the same time, you have tens of thousands of educated philosophers roaming around in academia who can't see any problems anywhere, right? If anything, they're socialists or communists or Marxists who says, of course there should be somebody ruling, right? It sucks.
Other arguments. Now, the people who say that are perfectly willing to use the power of the state to force people to hire women, use the power of the state to force people to give additional benefits and maternity leaves and so on to women, and smash and destroy and attack anybody who comes up with competing over alternate explanations. Because once you've got someone, not just to believe in a thought system that makes them good, but to act on it to the point where they've...
The way he just, positioned himself, he stood this way and did something just now, right? It's like he's sort of And what I reminded was there's a guy on YouTube who does impersonations of famous rock stars, among others, but mostly British and some American rock stars, right? And he also does an incredible Freddie Mercury, right? It's like, it's so funny. He's really, really good, right? I mean, there's one I can recommend that is called "Teach Yourself Freddie Mercury," where he tells you how to behave like him and how to look and how to and how to do all these things that Freddie Mercury did on stage and so on, and it's hilarious. It's hilarious, and he also does the Bee Gees, and it's like teach yourself the Bee Gees or something. It's also hilariously funny, right? And it's just the way Stefan Molyneux, moved around. It reminded me of how Steve Riggs does Freddie Mercury. It was just sort of I was reminded there. Just as a side note, I can recommend look up Stevie Riggs, Stevie, I think, and Riks, Stevie Riggs. And Teach Yourself Freddie Mercury. That's a brilliant one. There's also one where Keith Richards, Freddie Mercury, and Ozzy Osbourne has to go and get a driver's license and a driving lesson and so on. Not at the same time, it switches between them, right? It's also pretty funny. There's also some silly things, right? But there are a few, and he also does a magnificent Cliff Richard, right? And I actually think that he has recorded a version of Cliff Richard doing "The Power to All Our Friends." He stands like this, right? And he can look like Cliff Richard, and he has a little mirror so he can look at himself, right? And it's hilarious. Go look that up. If you are, a classic rock fan, like I've been like all my life, right? And I have seen videos of these rock stars and how all their mannerisms and how they talk, and also you can recognize them. And he's really good at times. And he does also the Beatles, like all four of them, right? Paul McCartney particularly, but John Lennon and George Harrison and Ringo, Peace and Love, right? He's great. He's so funny, right? Okay.
Armed the innocent. Once you've got people to do the black deeds of punishment on the innocent, they usually fight to the death to maintain that system. Because they have gained they're addicts, right? They're addicts to the dopamine of feeling good. Now, feeling good by doing good, genuine objective virtue, is a good thing.
Why is it? It's a good thing. Now you're going into violating Hume's Isord, right? You can't just throw around these, but this is good. When you do something, it's good. This is Christian bullshit, right? You can't just say that that's a good thing. And good is not a thing. Right? It's not like these people are behaving over there and that's a good thing. What is that? Are those objects, are those the things that are good? Because what they do is your interpretation, right? Are they fighting? Are they joking around? What are they doing? Are they going to be killed or whatever? What's going on, right? That's your interpretation. That's not a thing. It's the interpretation you call good or bad. And how do you get from that? You just describe the world and now you're saying it's good. Well, then you're violating Hume's Isord gap because you're not explaining how you get from experiencing reality to all of a sudden going to say good or bad for that matter, right? It's a recurring problem. You have to address this. As you say in your book, I certainly accept Hume's Isord distinction, and then you proceed to constantly violate it because you haven't even understood what it's all about. Come on, man.
But feeling good by doing evil.
But you're framing the whole thing now, right? Now you're saying evil and you're yelling like a priest. Fuck you, man, right? It's sort of bullshit. You do some decent philosophy, and then you're going into good and evil, and these are good and priest, right? Sort of.
Well, that's a hell of an addiction. And because you're attacking and punishing the virtuous, you face almost no chance of blowback. Right? By attacking the virtuous, the thoughtful, the sensitive, the curious, the innocent, then you gain the dopamine of feeling like you're fighting evil without actually incurring any risk. Why do more people attack?
The only reason you know that it's evil, if you don't have a moral principle, you can't label people as evil or good, right? So it's like there must be some authority telling you this is good and this is evil. And now Stefan Molyneux stepping into that authority, saying good, evil, right? Like a priest. Now this is where he becomes the sophist, right? He lures you in with decent philosophy about, who's in control of what narrative, and then good and evil, right? And all the Christians are sitting there, oh yes, I love it, man. I'm, coming in my trousers, right?
Christianity than Scientology. Scientology is heavily litigious, right? So people like to attack Christians because attacking a group that says you have to love your enemies poses virtually no risk.
Oh, I love you. Oh, man. Now he's framing it and he's, spooning with the Christians, right? Because he apparently has no philosophy left, right? It's sort of very confusing, all this, right? It's just too much. All this, the Christians and Donald Trump and philosophy and left and right. This big soup of things he's arguing, I can't, even if I didn't have heads or tails in it 4 or 5 years ago, it's completely confusing now. I have no sense of understanding what he's coming from and what he's doing, right? You can find a few things here and there that sounds reasonable, and then he goes into all sorts of tirades about, Christianity and, these huge concepts or huge aspects of human thinking that is just, labels as good and bad, right? It's just not functional, right? It's like he uses his argumentation so he makes sure that he ends up labeling the right people as evil and the right people or the useful people as good, right? The Christians are good, of course they are, because those are the ones who's going to, give him donations, right? And the last bastion, even though the Christians are the reason why we have socialism and, feminism and all this shit, right? They are apparently the last bastion against it. I mean, come the fuck on. Who is going to believe that other than those who are already considering themselves Christian? Because they want to be on the good side. They are also always felt that they're the good people, and if you don't, it's just because you're bad. So they are defined as the good people, just like, the land of God. America is the land of God because God is on our side. It's bullshit. It's manipulation, right? No, the only way to philosophize is doing your own freaking thinking, right? At least you should be as good in thinking that you can evaluate other people's thinking or other people's philosophy and figure out whether or not they actually got to some good thinking and some good conclusions or some good axioms and whatever, right? If you can't do that, you should enlighten yourself. Start thinking philosophically so you are able to justify whether or not some philosopher is actually doing some good philosophy. Otherwise, he's just going to say, give me money and I'll tell you what to do. And that's exactly what I don't want. That's exactly what has been wrong all the time, right? People saying, you have to pay for me because I'm perfect, right?
So they get the dopamine of feeling like they're doing good, fighting superstition and irrationality, while incurring no risk. and gaining all the dopamine of everyone approving them and calling them stunning and brave and wonderful and heroic and no risk. No risk. Now, any group that is regularly attacked because it provides the dopamine to people who want to do good without incurring the wrath of any evildoers, any group that then tries to fight back must be ruthlessly crushed and suppressed by society as a whole, because otherwise it's going to interfere with the dopamine drip, the addiction, the drug supply of feeling good rather than doing good, or rather feeling good by doing evil. Attacking those who won't attack back, attacking the conscientious, attacking the virtuous. That's why gay people go to Christian bakers to bake their cakes rather than other religions where there might be some blowback, right? So once you've got people addicted to doing evil for the cause they consider good, anything that questions that cause of virtue is extraordinarily dangerous to their psyche. Because here's the thing, like a drug addict, somebody who's addicted to barbiturates or benzodiazepines or opiates, whatever, the drug addict knows it's an addiction, knows it's bad, would like to stop at any time. But the person addicted to the natural opiates of punishing evildoers and promoting, quote, virtue, that person doesn't recognize the addiction is destructive. In fact, they view the addiction as virtuous. It's not even an addiction. It's a commitment to the cause of good and equality. And so you can't fix something that isn't even identified as a problem, or rather which is identified as a virtue. So some people, like there are famous stories of the writers who would drink, right? Now the writers wouldn't say, drinking is wonderful and great and I should do it and everyone should do it. They'd say, yeah, well, it's the only way I can write. Because alcohol is a depressant, it's a disinhibitor, right? So some people can write better without self-editing, and they can write with more flow when they're drunk or when they're drinking. So they say, well, I needed to write. But if you could give them the ability to write without being drunk, they'd probably take it, because they recognize that it's a negative. But the only way to get the people doing evil under the guise of good to recognize that it's a problem is to completely rewrite the ethics in their head and reveal them as evildoers rather than the Gabriels and white-winged flappers of virtue. Right? They think they're angels, but if you hold up a mirror, they see the face of a devil. They don't want to do that. That is crushing to your identity in a way that I assume people like you and I just can't understand it. Just can't understand what the hell it would be like to have thought you're doing good, to have attacked people, to have threatened people, to...
I think that deep down people in their subconscious or whatever it's called actually understand that there's something they don't understand. They just, I don't think that they tend to be, well, I can speak from my own point of view, right? I was confused before I started to philosophize. And I tend to be manipulatable from moral stances, right? I tended to be able to, when we got into some discussion and it sort of slided into some kind of moral argument, I would be susceptible, or what is it called, to go along with something that sounded moral, even if it wasn't correctly moral. But that was a lack from my point of view. People want to be on the moral side. They don't want to be on the evil side. But if it's also this majority thinking, because people want to be with the majority. They don't want to be the lonely guy who rocks the boat, right? Or have tried to be rigid in thinking and then risking rocking the boat. They're just going to say, well, I'm going to with everybody else because that's where they are. So I protect my own interest in a way, right? So it's a double-sided thing, right? They want to be with those that there are most of to feel protected. But they're also susceptible to moral judgment. So in some kind of rejection of cognitive dissonance, they will attach that morality that works with the majority and call that the good, right? And that's where the powers get their foot in the door. They say, well, we are the majority. We have this morality. It's not, they can't judge the morality from a neutral standpoint because they don't have the philosophy or the ability to do it. They have been, force-fed bullshit all their life. So they're going whatever the majority morality is, and then everybody follows each other over the cliff in the end, right? That's why you can have something like Nazi Germany, right? Because it's the majority combined with political induction of some kind of moral standard that fits the narrative for why they should be this kind of majority, right? Okay, so it's kind of complicated. It's highly psychological, right? It's also about the reason that there is this leader is because the leader is the one stating the morality, so that the majority doesn't have to have a morality. So they are absolved from their lack of morality by being able to say, well, the leader is telling me what to do, then I don't need the morality, right? So everything starts to fit together in this sort of triangular kind of sickness of a lack of moral, is a moral foundation that you can work from. But that's the problem of the philosophers. And that's why the state have bought all the philosophers, so they won't point it out, right? They won't get to a moral principle that works, right? Because they need to control the majority using this morality, or this shit, whatever they conjure up of morality.
Have scorned people, to have lied about people, to have destroyed people, to have gotten them fired, to have encouraged violence against them.
Oh, he's starting to yell now. It must be very serious now, right?
In the perfect chest-thumping, angelic certainty that you are on the side of good, truth, heroism, and virtue.
Okay, so then you might say, okay, but what have you done then, right? Well, you wrote a book 15 years ago called UPB, and it doesn't fucking work, right? Nobody understands it. Nobody can use it. Nobody uses it. It hasn't become anything but a free PDF that you can say that people have downloaded it. And because they have downloaded it, they have probably read it and understood it and lived by it. Bullshit. It doesn't work, right? It sucks. And again, go listen to my deconstruction. It sucks, man, right? You're not going to, with that in hand, you're not going to be the one luring people over to actually trying to get to some kind of standard for morality, right? It's not going to work. It sucks. It's disappointing. It's so disappointing that you think that there might actually be some decent philosophy in there. There isn't. There are no arguments. There are no definitions of any serious kind. And if there is, it's so convoluted that you can hardly understand what is being said. And it's just saying, well, I'm not going to prove that murder is wrong. It's like, all this, it's so ridiculous, right? The core argument is a syllogism that is not a syllogism, right? And it's ridiculous, right? So what are you trying to get at here, right? Are you just going to make people feel good so they give you more money? Or are you actually going to grab your own tits and say, well, my attempt 15 years ago doesn't seem to work. Maybe I should get back to the drawing board, right?
You have smashed up people's lives and destroyed anyone who disagrees with you or questions you in the full and certain, dull-witted, half-ape-like knowledge that you are just so virtuous. It's like that meme where there's some German soldier. I think it's...
Oh, it is also a typical Molyneux thing. He keeps going with metaphor number 2, and analogy number 3, and it keeps going the same groove and repeating, right? It's sort of creating a trance in you that you're sort of, you're losing connection with yourself, and you're sort of hypnotized into following your leader, right?
From, I don't know, Hogan's Heroes or something like that. Some Germans.
I think I'm going to take a little step forward here, right? See if I can not lose too much.
General attractiveness. Attractiveness to the opposite sex.
Okay, so now we're going into the love thing, apparently.
It's funny how, we're supposed to rewrite our entire language and paralyze the free and easy communications of billions of people around the world to take into account what is a tiny minority of people with disparate viewpoints or disparate experiences. And, I guess the question is, okay, but on what principle are we doing that? On what principle are we doing that? Because we have to accommodate people in society and what they want? Not sure about that one. Not sure about that one, Chief. The vast majority of people, a significant majority of people in the West have wanted reduced immigration for the last couple of decades. Can't seem to provide that.
But then they create a war in Ukraine or something like that and say, millions of people are coming, and if you don't, house them, you're bad, right? You can't control this war. It's the same story. No, they create a situation that you as a little people, a single individual, can't handle. And there's a big problem, and we have to do it, and you have to pay, and it's the same fucking old story. That's why you can have these fucking leaders, right? They're going to fucking screw you over.
0.1% of the population has a problem, and everyone has to change. On what principle do we do that?
Well, the principle is that power corrupts. There is no principle. Leaders, they fucking hate principle. They want to be able to do whatever they want in a given situation that they get off on, right? They don't want principles, right?
I identify as a non-racist and non-white supremacist. In fact, an anti-racial supremacist, but nobody's going to grant me that. But I got to grant everyone else their language.
Okay, I think we'll stop here, and this didn't become. We are how far into it? 35 minutes into this video, and maybe it's going to talk about love now. So I think I'll stop here and just call this a discussion of morality in a larger scope of things, and maybe I'll get back to the rest of this if I can get around to it, right? So otherwise, give me a like, give me a subscribe, give me a comment, and give me a donation if you feel that you have enough money to help a poor philosopher out, doing some, hands-on philosophy and a few deconstructions and what have you. Otherwise, have a very nice